Dad reads Sci-fi.
The Legacy of Heorot. Chapter 6. At the Wire. What the hammer? What the chains? In what furnace was thy brain? Where thy anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? William Blake, The Tiger. It didn't matter a damn that the stars above Carlos's head, twinkling in Avalon's eternal mist, were not those of Earth. It didn't matter that the wind carried the ticklish scent of alien blossoms, or that the plants beneath his feet were mingled Terran and Avalonian grasses. Beneath the smiling face of a conman, the quick and nimble fingers of a carpenter, and the mind of a superb historian, there lurked the soul of a farmer. Like it or not, Carlos felt absurdly at peace. He ran his gloved fingers above the electrified wire, without touching. The wire was connected to power leads and pressure sensors. Any attempt to climb over, push under, or break through it would trigger a shock. The more pressure exerted, the greater the voltage would grow, terminating in enough electricity to barbecue anything on the short side of a rhino. Huckleberry, the year-old Brayground German shepherd on the end of Carlos's leash, had learned to be quietly respectful of the wire. He could stand within 2 feet of it without flinching, but would venture no closer. The wire extended around 3 sides of the camp, starting north of the living quarters, running west near the main road, curving south past the animal hospital, the machine shop and the air pad. There it met the cliff again, stopping shy of the fields. There were more calf pens across the main road, these fenced separately, each enclosed in another graduated electric fence. Huckleberry sniffed the cages as they turned west toward the cliff edge, the 50-meter drop behind the camp that led to the sluggish waters of the Miskatonic. "Hey!" He threw an arm over his face as a wandering searchlight temporarily blinded him. "Qual es su problema, eh?" With an apologetic bobble, the searchlight glided on its way. Lamps and video cameras had been mounted on the communal dining hall, the roof of the machine shop, and a corner of the animal pens. There was barely a centimeter of the camp that their glaring ovals did not glare into momentary day. Saucers of light skimmed along the road, circling, dipping, and interweaving. Carlos watched those circles and pulled his jacket tighter. Suddenly he felt a chill, and the heat-reflective windbreaker didn't help at all. This cold blossomed within him. Silhouettes dimmed the window of the yellow Quonset hut next to the air pad. He watched enviously. In the communications shack there would be coffee, and companionship, and hot crullers, things he couldn't expect for another 40 minutes. Huck whined as footsteps approached, and Carlos's attack of hunger died instantly. He squared his shoulders and put a little more pep in his step, and at least I can look like a sentry. "Terry," he smiled. The dark softened a malicious grin. Terry looked fatigued and disgusted. His face, never plump, was drawn even thinner, and he looked as if he thought Cadman was boffing Sylvia while he walked patrol. Terry fished a pack of cigarettes out of his vest and offered one to Carlos. "Just the thing, amigo." They stood for a time, savoring earth-grown tobacco. "Might as well enjoy 'em." Terry exhaled a long white stream of smoke in the darkness. The mist in the night formed a wall that obliterated everything more than a kilometer from the camp. Their entire universe consisted of a few buildings and pens and fields and the pale, silent glow of the moons above them. It'll be a long time before anyone gets around to planting tobacco. "You may have discovered the real reason I came," Carlos said contentedly, smoke trickling from his nose. "The only way I could ever quit these damned things is to get 10 trillion miles away from the nearest convenience store." "Yeah," Terry's smile was tentative. "You know, amigo, you look about 10 years younger when you let yourself go." Terry was grinning now, but covered it with his hand as he took another drag on his cigarette. "Think we're wasting our time out here?" A shrug. "Maybe. A couple of nights should tell the tale. Your wife is going to have her babies here. Wouldn't you rather be sure? I mean, really sure?" Terry inhaled deeply. On a night like this, it's nice to have an excuse to be outside." The grin was open now and infectious. "You're right, Carlos. Thanks." Thanks, Carlos. He adjusted the rifle on his shoulder. Got to keep moving. Another butt? The searchlight cruised back through the fields. As it passed the pens, the colts and fillies froze their nervous motions, moist eyes glistening like frozen flames. Huckleberry growled, then subsided. We'll have the infrared up tomorrow, Carlos said quietly. Got a jiggle along the southern fence. Not enough to trigger the electricity, though. May not have been anything at all, but could have been a turkey, Terry said hopefully. See? Except Bobby told me she's seen damn few turkeys in the last week. Maybe they ran into something poisonous. He considered that for a moment. Or maybe it's Thanksgiving on Avalon. The yowl of a bobcat caught in the gears of a clock could have been no more sudden or piercing. The fence alarm hammered at the night, at their ears, stripping the haze from their speculations in an instant. Another sound was mixed into it, an animal sound, something wet and angry. Carlos's arm wrenched at the shoulder socket as Huckleberry spun on the end of the leash, running north for the armory. Jesus Christ! Terry screamed, lowering his rifle to port arms and running behind them. The searchlight swept along the fence, which was vibrating wildly. A ragged chorus of howls split the air as other dogs converged on the wire. Carlos was gasping, the sudden exertion burning his lungs, a silent litany of Dios mío, let it be a turkey. Por favor, let it be a turkey. He stumbled, lost his grip on Huckleberry. Before he could catch the leash, the animal was bounding toward the fence. Carlos charged after him. There was nothing to be seen, nothing heard except the dreadful screeching. Huckleberry was charging full tilt, snarling his challenge as if he could see something, smell something that Carlos could not. Charging directly at the fence, and with dreadful certainty, Carlos knew the dog would not stop in time. "Cut the power!" he screamed, but there was no time, and in the darkness, in the frenzy, Huckleberry leaped directly into the triple strands of the fence. His fur shot up away from his body like needles in a spray of cactus. His startled, agonized yelp was cut short by the hideous sound and smell of meat singeing in the fire. Sparks sizzled whitely from the relays as the section shorted. Huckleberry's body twitched and leaped like a frog on a griddle. Carlos turned away, choking as his dinner jolted sourly from his stomach. He swallowed hard, forcing it back down, gagging. No hurry now. After a few moments his vision cleared. Huckleberry's body, wreathed in strands of wire, sagged motionlessly now. John Van Don cut the power. Elliot Falkland pried the blackened, smoking corpse loose with a shovel. The surviving dogs were howling, sniffing, frightened. The stench of death was gut-wrenchingly strong, and a couple of the other colonists had turned away, covering their faces. Lights were coming up all over the camp, and everything was confusion and the patter of feet. Zach was there, skidding on his heels, then covering his nose. What happened here? Carlos? Alarm. Huckleberry went nuts. I think he smelled something. He tore his way. Hell, I let him go. He ran right into the fence. God, I'm sorry, Zach. No time for that. Did you see anything? There was another sound now. The sound of a motor coughing to life, then purring smoothly. Rotors engaging. A dust cloud swirled up behind the animal hospital as a skeeter rose from the air pad, orange landing lamps blazing. One of the searchlights spun to follow. Light sheathed the craft in silver. The skeeter wobbled, off balance. There was a weight beneath its belly, a calf dangling in a sling at the end of a 4-meter line. The animal wiggled feebly. Its legs and head hung with woeful vulnerability as the skeeter corrected itself and buzzed off to the north. Shit fire, Zach moaned. Save the ammunition, Carlos muttered, shielding his eyes as they tracked the skeeter. Wonder who that is. Terry was right behind him, hands gripping the rifle. I'll give you 2 guesses. Wayland and this tame ape, that's who. What is going on here? Zach yelled, running for the communications shack. Will someone tell me what is happening? I'm sure someone can, Terry said in disgust. Carlos had the distinct impression that Terry wanted nothing so much as to sight his rifle on the flying machine that was even now vanishing into the wall of mist. I'm damn sure that somebody knows exactly what is going on. The creature was curious and hungry, but mostly curious. There was often enough to eat, but never enough to learn, since the invaders came. Their mobile nests with the hard shells, the odd animals that shared their domain. Its short lifetime had offered too little to stimulate its senses. Strangeness exerted a fascination. In the murky racial past, there had been challenges, lethal unless understood. The threats were long gone, but the curiosity remained. The invaders seemed to have captured tiny pieces of the sun and moons and could make them shine where they wished. It could not grasp how this could be so, could not even form the proper questions, and so the wondering died before it was truly born. Only a trace remained, in healthy caution and a driving urge to learn more. Caution was virtually no inhibition at all. It could see their weaknesses. They were slow. They moved in herds like other beasts. They were merely interesting meat. Still, there was something. It crawled around the edge of the encampment, rounding the hill to the southwest, a hill that glittered with shiny squares. It bit one of them experimentally. The square was hard and tasteless, and moist with dew. The creature headed west around the fields, past the blowing wheat and corn, past a smaller field planted with soybeans, around to the edge of the calf pen. It had been here once before, during the rain, and had been well rewarded for its efforts. It was about to taste the fence when one of the circles of light glided its way. It scampered to the side, almost directly into a second glaring oval, and scampered backward for a few steps, staying in the darkness, playing hide-and-seek with it, while speed began to fizz in its veins. There was always a corridor of darkness to squeeze through, and the game was irresistible. It wiggled across the road toward the main camp, staying in darkness, always in darkness, until it was across from the horse pen. It watched them, paying little attention to the lights now. The patterns of movement absorbed so that it automatically moved enough to stay out of them. That game was too simple now. There was another, better game at hand. The horses paced nervously now, staring out into the darkness as their noses scented what their eyes could not see. It prowled around to the side, watching the horses. They moved quickly. Their skin was glossy and rich. The way their hair tossed with their fear was almost unenduringly appetizing. It whined, its hunger assuming the proportions of lust, and sniffed at the fence. There was something wrong here, it could tell. Its nostrils burned a little to sniff it. Something wrong. But the danger meant less with every passing moment. It wanted one of the horses. It wanted to bring one of them down. To outrun it, to leap upon it and break its neck, to rip open the flank and taste it, to gaze into its eyes in the moment of death. Its teeth met the wire. Every muscle in its body locked in unyielding contraction as electricity ripped through the line. It bit down so hard that the wire snapped. It jerked free, screaming its fear into the night. The captured sun surged after it. It ran, terrified of the vine that bit back, of the light, of things that it could not understand. And a thing inside its body flared to life. From a sac behind the peculiarly flattened lungs, a complex chemical pumped into its system. Its blood vessels swelled. Speed surged through its body. Its movements, already quick, accelerated as if a supercharger had been triggered. Its stubby legs churned at blur speed as its heartbeat tripled. The searchlights that swiveled frantically after it never had a chance. It was overheating, burning as it ran, and as it plunged into the waters of the Miskatonic, its skin nearly sizzled. It lay there, marinating in mud, extending its snorkel to the surface. Its heartbeat slowed, steadied, calmed. The chemical fire in its body faded slowly to ashes. The fear and pain gradually faded, leaving a core of rage. Anger at the invaders who hadn't the good grace to be either prey or direct competitor. The invaders were rivals, and they were cheats. They were something that it did not understand at all, something that could hurt it in a way that it had never experienced pain, inspire a fear that was quite new to it. One of their flying things came humming overhead, light stabbing out and dissolving the swirling gray mist. The creature watched through the muddy water, blinking hatefully, fearfully. It worked its way back upriver. Its thick reptilian body rippled slowly behind. Blood was in its mouth, and murder on its mind. Murder, not killing. Killing was for food or fun. This was an urge to hunt for the sake of hurting. Not to reduce their numbers, but to make them afraid. As it had been afraid, to repay the invaders for their gift of pain. How, though? How to get in? It had looked everywhere, and everywhere that it looked were the hard, tasteless fire vines which bit back. Everywhere except above the river, up along the lip of the cliff, above the straight 70-degree rise that the colonists had considered a natural barrier. There was no fence. Its eyes narrowed as it considered. This was it, then. It would crawl up the cliff and give them fear and death. It would teach them. Stubby legs lifted it from the river muck, and it began crawling up the cliff. The first few meters were easy, but the farther it climbed, the steeper the wall became, until its feet lost purchase, and it slid back down into the water. It lay there disgusted, and then trotted a few meters to the right, and tried again. Stealthily now. Eyes narrowed, one foot carefully finding support, and then another. The purchase was a little better here. Sedimentary rock, crumbling in layers, offering shelves for toeholds. The creature's heart beat faster as it considered the havoc it would wreak. It climbed higher this time, and when it started to slide, it fell a clean 8 feet before its claws found purchase. It reached the water in a shower of rocks. It seethed with rage now. Muscles flamed. Eyesight blurred with red. Again its body began to boil. Its breath seemed to sear its throat. All thought, all considerations vanished in a burst of speed. It erupted out of the water, heart thundering in its chest, legs paddling crazily. There was brush, then naked shattered rock, then a flat rock face. Its momentum was so great that when the footing was gone, it skimmed up the cliff face, momentum carrying it over places where there were no foothold at all. Its speed carried it up over the edge. Feet scrabbled for support that wasn't there. In a moment of utter panic, it realized that it was marooned in the air, sailing beyond the lip of the gorge in a great arc, spread-eagled for the captured sun. No sun swung its way. The slanted roof of a hut rose up to meet it. Its thick, scaled body slammed down, bumped over the rows of ceramic tiles to the edge, and thumped ignominiously to the ground. For a second it lay there, dazed and confused. Then, as its wits returned, it ran for the nearest shadows and crouched, breath whistling in its throat. After a few minutes, the panic and surprise subsided. It was inside, and could do what it wanted. From the shadows, it watched the invaders scurrying about, carrying shiny sticks in their forelegs, scuttling this way and that, in slow, comical confusion. It was quite funny, and in the shadows the creature's thick lips curled in a dolphin smile. The glaring circle of the searchlight cruised past it several times. Once, reflected from a metal tower, the light slid directly over it, but there was no one to see. Mine, it gurgled happily, all mine. It listened carefully, heard nothing approaching in the darkness, and crept out, peering both ways. It passed the nearest hut. The door cracked open, and it scampered back to a shadow and watched as two invaders scrambled clumsily past, reminding the creature of swimmers in their mindless haste. When they were gone, it crept out again, racing from shadow to shadow. The cliff ascent had made it hot and hungry. The Miskatonic could cool it, but there were matters to settle before it took the plunge. It paused in a shadow. Across the way was a patch of light, and it could see into the interior of one of the buildings. There was nothing of interest until a door opened and an invader came in, carrying something small and pinkish in its forelegs. With obvious tenderness, the yellow-topped invader laid its tiny burden into a nest made of rigid twigs and bent to lick the tiny thing's face very gently. The invader's foreleg brushed the wall, and the mock sun went out. The invader left the room. The creature waited another minute, then crept up to the open space, planned to crawl through and take the tender, wiggling morsel. To its surprise, the clear space was blocked. It tried again, gently, and still it couldn't get through, but now it was close enough to see that what blocked its path was somewhat like the cold, hard water that sometimes slid down the mountain into its pool. The clear barrier even gave slightly under its weight, and the creature could hear sounds through it. Duty again, Alicia? Well, at least April is asleep. Uncomprehending, it shook its head and tested the barrier again. There were more sounds of objects falling, creaking, and it watched the small invader in the nest wiggle, its tiny hind legs thrusting at the covering. The creature nosed against the barrier again, then reared back and smashed into it. The barrier splintered, sharp fragments slicing into its nose and above one eye. It scrambled through the window and took one step toward the small nest when the larger invader threw the door open and screamed piercingly. Their eyes met, and the creature thought that it had never seen anything more appetizing. With regret, it conceded that this was not the time for the large one. A shrug of its hindquarters brought its great spiked tail back and around to smash into the invader's midsection. The invader curled in on itself. Its noise stopped. The creature shrugged its tail again. The invader flew away and smashed into the wall. Her forelegs pawed at her torso, trying to staunch the flow of crimsons. She slid to the ground. No time now. Only moments had passed, but it could feel the danger. With a twist of its thick, powerful body, it was back to the nest of straight twigs, and the small invader even now squalling its fear. The creature reached in and picked it up. It was so small, so helpless, so like a swimmer. Invaders killed swimmers.